This episode is sponsored by Contentfy, a premium video editing and content repurposing service for busy content creators, influencers, brands, podcasters, YouTubers, and marketers. Contentfy provides unlimited end-to-end editing and repurposing services to help you get your video and audio content edited and repurposed quickly, easily, and reliably. Join other busy content creators, founders, brands, and marketers who now spend even more time creating while they take care of the rest. You no longer need to worry about spending hours editing anymore. Just create content, build your audience, and grow your business. If you're a content creator looking to save time and money, or looking to outsource your content marketing team, get your first free video edited now at contentfy.co. If you'd like to sponsor the SaaS District podcast or recommend any guests that you think would be valuable to be on the show, visit horizoncapital.com/SaaS-podcast today. Thanks again, folks. Hello, everyone. This is your host, Akil Jabbar, and welcome back to another episode of SaaS District. In today's episode, we'll be talking about how to build a long-term sustainable product development framework. Today, we have our guest, Christian Cox, joining us. Christian is a linguist, professional ponderer, and currently the co-founder and director of technology services at Piola Digital. He's an expert in real ways the businesses and the technology group can work together to refine the product backlog and prioritize development based on complexity and widespread net value of your SaaS company. So welcome, Christian. Super excited to have you on SaaS District Show today.
Thank you for having me. Super humbled to, get to share a little bit of your space here and your time. Super stoked to, talk about this. And like I said, share my hardest lessons learned with everybody listening, kind of save you some headache going forward. And I always say your product backlog will thank you in the long run.
Absolutely. Yeah. Before we get into kind of the backlog, because I know there's a lot to kind of dig in there, can you share a little bit, your personal background, what's been your past positions, ventures, up until, co-founding Piola Digital?
Yeah. So basically, I've probably got the most unorthodox background in tech that you'll ever hear of. I'm a Spanish geek turned product development nerd. I studied Spanish all through high school. It was my major in college. After college, my next logical step was move to Latin America. So I lived in Argentina for 6 years. I wanted to, soak up the culture, get good at, really speaking Spanish fluently. And I was just working like table waiting jobs and things like that. And when graduation time came, I had to find some excuse to stay in Argentina. And so I applied to an entry-level position as a content manager at a web development firm. I had been doing like this super makeshift blog of traveling. So I was, pretty familiar with WordPress and some very basic HTML editing. And that's kind of how I got my footing in the technology world. And then when I got there and I actually saw what, the developers were doing, actually writing all these lines of code and literally being able to do whatever they wanted through, just that. And I was just blown away. And, obviously I was just like getting, dipping my toes in the water at that point. But to me, it was just so fascinating having come from just like a language background to come into this new world and really see that there's, so many possibilities. And you can literally build whatever you want. So that's kind of, how I got into technology. And yeah, I just dove head in from there. I just became a student of it and just have been trying to improve my craft ever since. I always ask people questions, what are better ways we can do this? What are better ways we can learn? And technology is really that type of field anyway, right? Things become obsolete pretty quickly. So you kind of have to stay on your toes and be looking for the best practices and the best ways to do things. Because, if not, businesses get left behind.
Exactly. And then, let's talk a little bit more about Makeshift. So I think you built that. You're the, past founder in 2019. What was the, the idea to launch? What was the problem you were looking to solve in the market that you thought was helpful for people to follow you?
Yeah. So funny story. Makeshift is actually, it's in my bio on Twitter. But it's literally, it says I'm a Makeshift founder. actually, Makeshift is not a company. I have always been open to just, letting people know that, I don't know it all. Right. And so when we started Piola Digital in 2019. And, I just threw that on my bio, like, hey, I'm a Makeshift founder. Learning as we go. We're building in public, and all of the lessons that we learn, we want to share that with people. So it's just kind of something that I threw in my bio. It's been there for a little while, but it's just kind of like embracing this idea of just like really building in front of people. Hey, what's working for you? This is what's working for us. And quite literally just just says, hey, I'm a Makeshift founder at this company, and that's kind of the idea, or I didn't really think much of it when I threw it on my bio at the time. But it's kind of just like, at some point we all got to start, our learning adventure somewhere. And for me, I was never going to put, CEO and founder of blah, blah, blah company. It wasn't really anything at the time. Right. So just like, I think this fits what we're doing, as of today at the time, and, I'm continuing to learn. So, if you go on my Twitter bio, it literally just says, I'm the Makeshift founder of, Piola Digital and another little venture that I've been working on. But that's kind of, there's really no, story behind that. It's just literally Makeshift as an adjective and founder as, the noun.
No, I think that's super fascinating. I think we had another guest, Mubashar Iqbal. He's also big on that. I think he's built over 40 different products, and he likes to publicly kind of show his process over time. And I'm sure you probably are familiar with him in the space. I think it's fascinating.
Yeah. I think it's just great to, one of the things I love about this kind of this little community on Twitter of like people building in public is like, once you get over yourself and the fear of, thinking that everybody's watching you and watching what you're doing and kind of judging you, you realize there are more people who are similar to you than, maybe you originally thought of. And I've been guilty of this as well. But once you kind of like get over that, you realize like even guys who are, or gals who are, 20 years into their entrepreneurial career, they're still learning things every day. So, it's just one of those things for me where it's like, being able to truly kind of like be vulnerable, and be open to saying, I don't have all the answers, but, I'm more than happy to share my lessons learned with you guys. And, if it helps, then, I'm happy to do so. So that's kind of one of my mantras that I go by. And I love to just, let people know, like, we'll do our absolute best. We don't know all the answers. There's things that we'll find out as we go along, but yeah, building in public and just sharing openly, I think, that transparency is valuable to people in the community, in the long run.
100%. So you work with a lot of SaaS founders. And, I want to kind of understand a little bit, Piola Digital, you guys do kind of product outsourcing as well, right? So you do product outsourcing, development, onshore, offshore. I want to talk about that a little bit more because, I think there's a misconception. I've seen this happen many, many times where founders at the early stage, maybe their first time kind of building a product, they have an idea. They are not product people. They're not developers. And rather than, finding a CTO, they find somebody to outsource the entire project to. And every time I've seen that happen, it's been a complete mess. I don't know, maybe you've seen elsewise. How do you kind of typically work with those SaaS founders? How do you help them? How do you speak with them and, get them through that? And do you work with those type of projects?
Yeah, I think it's you really have to understand, as a founder, and you make a good point, right? There's two types of founders. I think there's a founder who's non-technical, who maybe in the early stages leading up to MVP, they got folks to do, freelance work and put together something that works pretty well. And then you've got the technical founder who, again, maybe it's a guy or gal who did most of the heavy lifting, most of the coding on their own up front. So they kind of understand what those incremental processes are like, as far as building is concerned. I think what you really want to find in a partner when you're going to outsource your development work is really try to find somebody who's going to have those values about building incrementally. So like, for example, on our projects, we work in 2-week sprints, and we're demoing everything that we've done, every other Friday or whatever day sprint starts on, every other week we're demoing what we worked on, right? And so we work closely with our stakeholders to understand, okay, this is everything that we've got in the product backlog. Can we sit down and have discussions about prioritizing our different stories and different features based on what's going to give you a healthy ROI in the near term, but also in the long term, because you want to put in architecture that supports scalability going forward. And then you really have to get into this cadence where you kind of refine those stories and get them sprint ready so that you can plan out sprints like 2 or 3 sprints ahead. And then, just that cadence of demoing every 2 weeks, and really building in increments. I think that's the difficult part that a lot of companies run into when they're at this pivotal kind of growth stage in their SaaS journey, where they're trying to figure out, how do we balance, maybe they've raised funds and you're trying to figure out how do we balance our investment in sales and marketing, but also how do we, build a framework on the back end of the house that the people don't really see that accompanies that sales and marketing growth, right? And I think it's super important, like for SaaS founders, when you're looking to partner with somebody, make sure that value of building in increments, and kind of planning out the product roadmap over time is something that's got to be there for me. Otherwise, it can go haywire, and timelines get out of whack, and we thought we wanted to develop this, and we ended up developing something that people didn't want.
Right.
So I don't know if that kind of answers the question, but that kind of, to me, it gives you a better chance, and things can always come up. But if you can at least get in the mindset of, partnering with people who can kind of help you build out that sustainable path going forward, it'll give you a better chance to be agile and adapt quickly if you need to.
Mm. Can you just define quickly, what are sprints for people listening who are maybe not as familiar with the technical term? Can you just share that with us?
So a sprint is essentially, it's like a, the standard is a 2-week time period of just flat out developing. Prior to the sprint, you have different activities, different time box meetings. They could be grooming sessions, which essentially is looking at everything that's in your product backlog. You talk through it with both the business stakeholders as well as the technical folks who can provide that input. And you break them down into little bite-sized actionable pieces of work called user stories. The framework of the user stories basically says, as somebody, I want to do something so that I can achieve XYZ business outcome, right? So you get a bunch of these little user stories, very clearly defined in a way that's actionable for your technical team. And then they decide the workload that they can take on in each sprint or 2-week period. And at the end of that 2-week period, then you have a demo that you share with the stakeholders of everything that you've worked on. Ideally, you'd like to get into a cadence that allows you to plan 2 or 3 sprints ahead so that you're kind of just hitting the ground running, right? And every time you get to the demo, it's like, here's another increment that we've been able to put on top of what we delivered last time. And you really set something up that allows your product to be, 1% better every 2 weeks, right? And it's the classic example that I always talk about with people is like, how many millions of people have iPhones, right? And, personally, I have an iPhone, and, you sort of see these little tweaks of, something that's different, and you're like, this is nice. It wasn't there 4 weeks ago. But it's something that adds up over time, right? Until they get to, like, obviously their major release where it's a huge jump from one number to the next in iOS. But those are the little things that set you up for kind of like this, long-term sustainability in development, because what you want to get away from is what's known as waterfall delivery, where it's just like tons of documentation and just you do one thing, you spend a lot of time on it, then you go to the next thing and you spend a lot of time on that. Really focusing on this idea of building a working product because you're not gonna change the world with your first release, right? That's one of the hardest lessons that I think we all need to learn. You won't be releasing the most incredible product the first time around. So you really have to become comfortable with, building in these 2-week increments and kind of just letting it all add up over time. I think generally speaking, we tend to overestimate what we can do in a month, right? But we underestimate what we can do in a year's worth of development work. So I think, if you can, as a SaaS founder, if you can kind of partner with someone who can guide you along that path, can collaborate with your business stakeholders and also speak the same language of the technical people, bridging that gap between the business and the IT group, it becomes something that's much more manageable.
And how do you kind of, adding to that point where you said there's people who come and maybe are frustrated because, it's not something that the end user was actually expecting. Maybe it's not what the founder was expecting. In those early stages of SaaS founders looking to maybe define that framework for their MVP, how do you work with them to choose that kind of baseline of what's needed as a core functionality and just enough to get released versus them saying, no, look, this is what we want. This is what we want to build. They tell you this big vision, go out there and build this, and this, where all you need is, just this first part, make sure, this is what your users want. And then how do you work with them to define that first part and get a release out?
So SaaS founders, they're always looking to figure out, some sort of gap in a process that already exists. Right. So when you're looking at that gap in the market that you're trying to fill, obviously a ton of ideas come to mind. But it really is kind of just like this grounding experience where you just talk, it's literally just talking through it, right? Where you say, okay, this gap that you're trying to fill at the very bare minimum, how can we fill it? Right? Like without all the bells and whistles, what's going to bridge this gap? What's going to make it, 2% easier for the end user? Right? I think most of us, and a lot of products, they're like conceived as a result of us as a user being like, hey, this process sucks. I wish I could do this, this, and this, and then they go out and build it. Right? I think if we can kind of put ourselves in the customer's shoes, right? So for me, putting ourselves in the customer's shoes as remembering what it's like for us as consumers. And for us as the user who is frustrated with whatever process we're working with. And then 2, if you can actually have conversations with people and say, hey, let's say you've profiled a certain type of person at a certain type of company. If you can just ask questions to people, and say, hey, I bet you do this quite often. Would it be helpful if you could, achieve the same outcome? But skipping this step and just going straight here. If you can have those conversations and then couple that with me as a user, what drives me crazy, right? And at the very bare minimum, what do I need to make this process just 1% better, right? I think if you can help people like make processes more frictionless, whatever is. And it's going to be different for each context, but that's why it's important to have these conversations. And the SaaS founders who are ideating all this, they're the ones who are going to know, right? And so for me, it's just like I ask them, can you just tell me everything that you've noticed or that you've observed about this process? And then where can we drill down to start? Like, where can we find the baseline? Because there's going to be a ton of things that you can build on top of that. And then also, as you get in front of more people, they're going to tell you, hey, it would be nice to have this feature, and this feature. But I think, kind of to, reel it back in, it's 2 parts for me. It's if it's MVP, can you talk to potential users who perform a certain task or perform a certain process? Can you find out what's driving them crazy? You as a user, what is grinding your gears as well, and then whatever patterns you notice between the conversations you're having and also what's driving you insane when you're doing these tasks, what's the least amount of effort required and the most bare bones functionality that you can get to just make this process 1% better. At least 1% better, just to make sure it's a working product and get it out in front of people. If you've made their process slightly less have slightly less friction, then you're onto something.
Mm. So you said slightly less friction. I want to kind of make it a little bit more tangible. So let's say you're talking to these ideal, your ICPs or these buyer personas you've identified. You're going out to them, asking them what products or what problems you can help them solve. And you go and build a product for them. Is there any metrics that you like to measure specifically that can tell you, is this segment a good fit or the right target? Or you go on to 3 and they say, no, this one is the right one that you want to continue focusing to build around?
Yeah. So for an example, and this is actually a conversation I had with my wife the other day, where I think the service business industry is notorious for having these super outdated onboarding processes. So you think about cleaning services, car washes, details. That sector is actually getting is actually getting better. Lawn services, but the other day I was on a website for a cleaning service, and it's still you got to call, they got to tell you the quote, they got to ask you so many questions, and right there, if you're the webmaster, you can look at what's the abandonment rate on my website, right? So you can look at the before, and then if you're trying to improve this particular process, me as a consumer, I personally like less steps. If I can go to that site and understand exactly what it is I'm getting, how much I have to pay, then my conversion rate, me personally, is going to be higher, right? I go and I know what I know what I need, I know what I'm looking for. I found it, so I filled out the form and I paid, right? So that's an example of a metric that you can look at, right? In the case of the service business, it's how many people got to the site and ended up putting something in the cart and paying. If it's SaaS, it's kind of like if your user has a very specific task to perform, and you have some sort of and you're capturing data around the use of this task, you can look at how many steps are involved to complete a certain task, and you can see did they reach the endpoint or not, and break it down and say why, and then look at every single step involved and see where can we eliminate steps to make this easier. That's actually one of the most recent projects that we worked on is we've a lot of companies, they might have a lot of hot fixes that are built on top of each other. And for the audience, if you're not familiar with that term, a hot fix is basically just something came up, and rather than looking at it from a long-term point of view architecturally to figure out what's the best design to implement, it's kind of sweeping it under the rug with a quick fix, and then it just stays there. But it's not really useful, right? It's like a one-off case that you develop something really quickly to fix this point in the process. And one of the most recent projects that we worked on, this client had a ton of hot fixes just piled on top of each other, and we discovered that when we were looking to rebuild some of their user flows, there were a lot of steps involved in certain processes that really weren't necessary, and it just makes the process as a user cumbersome. And so, kind of walking through those examples, and these folks, they weren't collecting any data, but if there is data that can kind of help you see how many people are doing what we thought they were going to be doing, and if it's not in line with what we expected, where can we pick apart that process, go through it, and see where the hiccup might be? Why might the user be more hesitant to finish this process than this other process? Are there parts we can eliminate? Are there steps we can eliminate to make sure that they get to the end goal quicker and easier? Make it simple and painless.
Right. That makes sense. And then, adding to that, so those people who are, maybe built something, they've talked to their audience, they've kind of, set up their metrics to see what's kind of working. For SaaS specifically, do you have any strategies? I'm assuming you've worked with different SaaS companies who've launched products. How should they be looking at, releasing it? What does a successful release look like, or, especially at the beta stage? And do you have any places you suggest for people to promote and launch at the early stages?
So I think a successful release is, I think a lot of successful SaaS companies have had good releases when they can get some really good initial traction, um, and obviously that's you're going to probably see that reflected in both your usage traffic, and then if you're paid right out the gate, right, depending on what kind of revenue structure you have. Let's say you have a 7-day trial and then people convert to paid. Um, that's another really good metric that you can look at. And I think about it from as a consumer, there have been different tools that I've used for such and such a reason where um, I'm happy to pay for it after the trial's over. And then there's other tools that I've used, and I've done the trial, but it didn't kind of blow me away. So if you're launching for the very first time, I think that's a really key metric. And depending on your pricing model, if you've done the free tier and then it converts to a paid subscription, if there's a significant drop off there, then I think you've got something to work on as far as what your value is that you're providing to the user. And on the flip side, if you've done the same pricing model where it's free upfront, and then after a certain amount of days, it switches to a paid subscription. Mm-hmm. If you've noticed kind of like a steady path there, and as well if you've noticed like an uptick there because more people are getting on and onboarding, that's also a very key metric to pay attention to. I think one of the things after that kind of launch that founders really need to be wary of is after the initial hype wears off, how do you keep the user falling in love with the product every time they come back? Because we've seen time and time again, I'm sure everybody's seen it, where like a product did really well in the first year, 2 years, 3 years, but then it just couldn't quite keep up with the demand that people were having for the product. And to me, that falls squarely on the product development piece, because you can throw money at sales and marketing all you want, but if at the end of the day your product development's not accompanying that, it's going to be super difficult for you to stay relevant in a market that's so saturated, because a lot of people are doing things that are really similar to you. Even if your competition is doing the exact same thing that you're doing, why should your user stay with you, right? What's that one thing or that small handful of things that you're working on, or the way you deliver, that's a game changer for the user, right? So, I think that's something that to me is kind of just like something that I've paid attention to. And what I'm really curious to pay attention to these days is, Clubhouse and Twitter Spaces. I'm really interested in seeing how that plays out. Cause, from a product development standpoint, Twitter Spaces is, like ramping up their delivery, and you can tell that they've been building in increments really quickly. In Clubhouse, I think they did a raise not too long ago. But I'm still just trying to figure out what's going to happen there. Cause, as a user, it's cool. But me personally, the notifications drive me crazy. And I think that's what most people have, what most people have complained about. So, it's interesting. I think that's a perfect example. Like after the initial hype wears off, in the long term, like what does Clubhouse look like in 2024? That's kind of like what I'm trying to get at. Cause you can have an initial release and everybody's going to go crazy around it, and it's great. But there's this kind of like pivotal growth stage, right? And that's kind of like where we come in and we say, okay, you've done some really awesome stuff up until today. How do we sustain that and improve and build upon it? So that's kind of just like, I think I got off track there, but it just came to mind, after the, getting to the MVP and figure out, did your release go well? You definitely celebrate that when it does. But it's the beginning, and I think most people look to the future anyway.
No, I mean, and that's kind of the no problem kind of wandering off. I mean, we're talking about long-term sustainable product development here. So how do you kind of refine or prioritize? Do you have some effective ways to refine that product backlog and then prioritize your development based on kind of, after that initial launch, you get that release? How do you keep them, like you said, engaged for the long term? Do you have ways to kind of prioritize and set those up? Any frameworks?
Yeah. So I think, I'm a big fan of data. So, typically once you've reached your MVP and it's been out for a little while and it's doing pretty well, and you're at this stage where, a lot of SaaS companies, they kind of prove their concept and then they'll raise money because they want to, take it to the next level. At that point, it's really important to have your business goals defined very clearly as far as, what do you need to implement to have a healthy ROI in the short term, but also the long term, right? So if you can look at your data and see what kind of patterns you have in your data, and you couple that with a business goal, then you have a decent chance of kind of reverse engineering that and getting to your product backlog items. One of the exercises that I like personally is called impact mapping. So you can just get a whiteboard and you start on the very left-hand side and you just draw out in a circle what's your business goal. Then you have 4 columns. The first column is called personas. So these can be existing users. These can be users who you want to attract from your competitors. The next column is called, it's your customer outcome. The third column is your business impact. So the outcome for the customer, what impact does it have on the business? And then as a result of all this, what are the items that you need to develop in your final column, which is called your product backlog items? What are the items that you need to develop in order to achieve this, right? So if you say our business goal is to increase our user base by 20%, and we have one of our personas as an existing customer, the outcome for that persona is, okay, we just want them they want to have a really incredible experience when they use this, right? So in the third column, the business impact for us, if this person is having a really good user experience, is they might recommend their friends and colleagues in the space to use our product. How do we make that easier for them? Okay, so then we develop a feature of bonus incentives for, and this could be like, here's my link. And when you join, you get $5 off of your first month, and I get $5, something like that, right? Or different product backlogs items to, kind of gamify this. So that's just one example, and it's super generic. But when you talk through that and you kind of provide that space to kind of get the creative juices flowing, when you bring the business stakeholders into that kind of sandbox world, then you get to figure out, exactly what is it that we can develop here, and that's in the short term that's going to help us, reach that business goal of, in this case, we want to up our user base by 20%, right? So that's just like a super high level example of something that I like to do, because, really what it comes down to at the end of the day, Q, is like, we're at the center of all the processes. Can we get together and just discuss it, right? The hardest thing is getting time on stakeholders' calendars, because they're always putting out fires and they're always swamped. But at the same time, interestingly enough, they need more of that time to just have nothing to do but just think and contemplate, because those are the activities that are going to help them get to the next level in their business, right? So if you can, if I can find a way to get an hour and a half on a stakeholder's calendar, and can we just chop it up? Can we just talk about it? And we can do these types of activities that kind of just visually let everybody get a chance to imagine what we're talking about, what we're trying to achieve. Those are the best moments, really. And I've seen it time and time again, when you can just get the necessary stakeholders in the same space and they're talking and I'm not, I've done my job. If they're talking and I'm just watching and I'm a spectator, then we've got something good going on. And that really is how you kind of reverse engineer that and get to what exactly do we need to develop, based on what they've seen in the data, versus what they're defining as the business goals are. If they can have those conversations, and like I said, and I'm just a fly on the wall, just writing it down, then I've done my job.
Yeah, it sounds so simple, right? But I mean, I doubt how many people actually do that. I mean, we try to do that at least once a quarter, kind of do a look back on, see, look deep into our data, actually plan time. I know it takes like conscious effort. You have to plan that, kind of set time apart, look at, everything, get all the data, look at it, analyze it, and have everyone together and, make kind of decisions for what you want to do. But I think they're super, super effective. And I recommend everybody do that if they can, right?
If you can time box those meetings too, because it's easy to get off track and stuff like that. But if you can time box those meetings and beforehand let everybody know what the objectives are, like what do we want to achieve, I think you can make sure that everybody stays cognizant of everybody's time and everybody kind of goes with that mindset, saying, okay, this is what we want to achieve at the end of this meeting, and like we absolutely must make some progress on this, because like you said, it's difficult because people are always swamped and they're putting out fires and there's always something to do, and you need things done yesterday because this came up out of nowhere, and that type of thing. So it's hard, but can we just take it one day at a time? That's really all you can do. There's so much literature on product development and what the ideal frameworks are. Each organization is going to have its own little quirks, and what bits and pieces can you take away from what the book says and stuff like that. But can we at least just take it one day at a time and see what, how do we mold it to fit, our people and our processes and our culture? And, just focus on, can we just get, 1% better every day? In the long run, what you're putting out from an IT perspective, is going to be much more solid. That I can guarantee. It's not going to be perfect, but it'll be much more solid than when you're working and you've got silos up and people aren't talking to each other and that type of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, this has been great, Christian. Love kind of chatting about this. I want to kind of shift gears more into the personal questions, a little bit more rapid fire. So starting off, kind of, what's one advice you wish you had known and maybe would tell your 25-year-old self, looking back to knowing what you know today?
Man, people, when I get asked this question, and this really doesn't have anything to do with SaaS or product development itself, but this is more kind of just entrepreneurship in general. Like I said at the beginning of the recording, I'm Spanish major turned product geek. So on paper, like I was never the person who was I wasn't the guy in high school who everybody was like, yeah, in 20 years, he'll be a millionaire. That was not the case. And I just learned, I was just super curious. So, one, if you want to do something, and you want to do it well, be okay with failure up front. Especially if it's something that's new to you. Be okay with failure and be okay with knowing that there are people who have walked the path before you, and, see what you can take away from their journeys to save yourself some headache in the long run. And realize that we're all learning, and everybody's, people are more willing to help and share than initially we think so. And I think that's kind of just like this psychological thing that as humans, we have a hard time getting over at the beginning, because, we want to do things, really well. And it's hard to let go of that fear of, it not coming out perfectly. So I would say that as number one. Number two, when you start your entrepreneurial journey, and this is probably for me the most important lesson that I've learned, this has to do with marketing and what your value is and what your messaging is like. If you can learn to say more with less, then you're golden. The first website that we put out for Piola Digital, and my background is, after I got into technology, I ended up working for a big multinational management consulting firm. And that was all I knew, right? That was kind of like what I was raised in, quote unquote, as a young professional. And so when I first started, and granted, this is a type of company that, they're on the New York Stock Exchange, and they don't have a tangible product. It's all the value of their brand, right? So that's what's driving their stock price. So when you go to their site, you don't really see exactly what their offer is. It's just a bunch of kind of like, fluff. It's the buzzwords and the industry of, the industry fluff and what everybody's talking about that year or whatever. And our first website, with that being all I knew, we did something similar. And I realized that when you're first starting out and nobody knows you, you absolutely cannot do that. You cannot, just throw buzzwords around and all the fluff and the stuff that sounds cool, but that doesn't really say much. And so we had to learn that lesson, the hard way, where we were looking at our bounce rates on our websites, and they were really high because, people went to our website and said, it looks nice, but I don't really understand what you guys do. And that was a really hard lesson for me that I had to learn from a marketing standpoint, where, your messaging needs to be very clear. And you need to know how to say less with more, or sorry, more with less. My favorite examples are, I go to the Spotify website, or I go to Airbnb, and I know exactly what I need to do, and I know how to do it and get it done, and that's it, and I'm done, right? I don't need to read through a bunch of stuff. That's just, like pretty words, and it sounds nice, but I still don't know what I'm reading at the end of the day, right? I go to those types of websites, and it's so clear what the offer is. There's no way that the user can be confused, right? And I think that, that was, for me, it was the most important lesson that I've learned so far in my entrepreneurial journey. Just being able to have really super concise messaging, and about what your product or your service offers. And if you can say the most important things about your product and then the problem you're solving with less words, then I think you have a really good shot out the gate of really, connecting with people and getting them to hop on board with you.
Yeah, so super sound advice, and I completely agree with those two. Christian, who or what are the best 3 resources? Just 3 that are, books and or people. It could be mentors or people you follow, which you mentioned. There's people out there that you look up to and are maybe helping you. Who you say have been the most instrumental to your success over these last few years?
So there's a guy that I've been following on LinkedIn. He's kind of been like mentoring me from a distance, because I've never been able to go to one of his seminars or participate in one of his courses. But he does really, really good B2B sales. His name is Jason Bay, and I'll give you the link to his LinkedIn so you can share with the audience later. And this is probably a whole nother podcast conversation, but like B2B sales is such an art, and I've come to respect that profession so much, because in the early days when you're doing all the outreach by yourself, it is tough. And I'm sure it's hard, right? And it's, how do you communicate with people and something that you offer that you feel is valuable, but they don't know is valuable, and you have to find a way to let them understand that it's valuable. So he's one guy that I highly, highly recommend that SaaS founders follow. As you build out sales organizations, he's dropping some really, really solid tips and tricks on his LinkedIn timeline daily. There's a plethora of information that he's sharing. So yeah, definitely recommend him. The other thing is, there's a book that I am halfway through. It's written by, what's his name? He's one of the Harvard professors. Harvard has a podcast called After Hours. It's a panel of 3 of their professors, and they talk about recent events, and it's easy to digest, right? It's not like super heavy conversations. It's easy to digest. And the professor's name is Mr. Desai. I can't remember his first name, but he wrote a book about finance. He's the finance professor. And he wrote a book about how finance works. And I think both from a business and from a personal standpoint, it's super important to understand that stuff. Obviously, as you get into business and you start to, you know, be exposed to more terminology that maybe you didn't know in your undergrad. You know, again, for somebody like me whose background is, you know, has nothing to do with business, you know, a resource like that for me was super fundamental. Um, and then the last book, you said three, right?
Yeah, three. Yeah.
Okay. The last book that I'm also halfway through is, I think everybody's heard of it. It's, I think it's by Dale Carnegie. It's How to Make Friends.
How to
And
win
I can't remember
friends. Yeah.
I can't remember, it's how to make friends and win business, something like that. I can't remember the
Okay.
full title, but essentially it talks about soft skills. Um, when I was in my undergrad, early in my undergrad, I worked, at a customer service job at Kohl's. And I realized how much I enjoy just interacting with people and you know, how can I help you? Like I enjoy that a lot, you know. We used to have customers that come in and, you know, have the most ridiculous complaints, but my job is to, you know, fix that. And how can I make you walk away, you know, slightly less mad than you came in? And I realized that, that was something that I enjoyed. And this book touched on that because it talks about, you know, your soft skills representing a significant, percentage of how successful you might be financially. I think, for me, business is kind of like 50% know-how, 50% can you, just vibe with people and, just chop it up. I think at the end of the day, people don't buy from a company, they buy from a person, right? People like to work with folks, that are, just cool, easy to, like the type of people, you'll go and grab a beer with after work. Like, are you someone that we can just vibe with, right? So, yeah, definitely that book because it just, hit home for me is, with soft skills and nobody wants to be like dealing with somebody who's super robotic at the end of the day.
Sure.
So, that's a good one that I recommend to, it keeps you kind of in check with your verbals and your nonverbals and things like that as you interact with
Absolutely.
more people.
How to Win Friends and Influence People. Dale
Yes.
Carnegie. Yeah, everybody should recommend that. We'll add that link to our show notes as well. Yeah.
Yes.
Sweet. Christian, what does success mean to you today? Whether that's personally, financially, business, life. There's no right answer. How do you define it today? What keeps you going?
What keeps me going is, I think I mentioned to you while we were setting this up, my wife and I, we had our first baby girl last year. She's going to be 1 on Wednesday. I just love to hang out with my girls, and for me, entrepreneurship is a tool that will allow me to do that more and more. It's obviously money doesn't directly buy happiness. I think everybody can understand that. But it is a tool that kind of allows you to buy back some of your own time. And, my daughter, she's 1 now, we might look for, another child here in the near future. And I just want to, be able to just hang out with them. If she's like, daddy, I got a dance recital or I just, those little things, just like moments in time that you really never get back. Right. And either way, I'm going to be busting my tail working. So if I give myself an opportunity to do it for me, that's something that I've always told people. Like if you're on the fence about trying to find what success is like for you, and you want to make a ton of money or whatever, really figure out what your why is. So for me, it has everything to do with family. Also, I think I mentioned at the beginning of the show, I spent most of my 20s living in Argentina. That was the most life-changing experience that I've ever had. My wife is from Argentina. We speak Spanish at home with our little one. And Latin America is such a special region in the world because there's so much technical talent out there. And it's kind of sad because it's hard to bridge the gap between North America and South America, purely because of the language barrier. And if you're not one of these big firms that's going down there and installing the infrastructure, it's super hard for them to, kind of show off what they got going on down there. And so that was one of the things that for me, when we conceived Piola Digital, it was like, if I can show off Latin American talent in a way that really like, kind of shines the light on what they're doing down there, because, you know, I had people take chances on me out there when on paper I wasn't the right candidate for the job and stuff like that. And, you know, I met some of the most talented developers I've met in my journey are, you know, they're all, you know, Latinos still based in their home countries. And if I can help bridge that gap and, you know, just show off Latin American talent, you know, for me, that's one of the most gratifying things about, you know, what I'm doing. And that's definitely part of why I do what I do. You know, I love when people are like, you know, we tried outsourcing to India, it didn't work. And, you know, I wanted to go to Latin America, but I don't speak Spanish. And I'm like, got you. I got you, because this team is awesome.
Yeah, I get it. I'm in Guadalajara, Mexico right now, so we got a lot of good talent down here too, and I know a lot of people outsourcing. Yeah, yes, so the next podcast we'll have to do in Spanish, but I think this has been good in English. Yeah. Cool, man. Christian, this has been great. I appreciate you jumping on, chatting, sharing. This has been fun. How can the audience get in touch with you? How can they learn more about you and what you're working on if they want to say hi?
Yeah. So I'm usually more active on Twitter. My Twitter handle is _CCOX14. That's where I'm making most of my noise weekly. And other than that, our website is Piola, Piola digital.com. So you can check out what we're working on. There's a free guide on there about kind of how to you know, transition to agile, sustainable delivery in a nearshore setting. So you can download that. There's just a quick form. It just says name, email, I think title on it, but it's free. You know, we don't spam you. I just like to say hi every now and then. Literally, I think it's like once every 3 weeks, I'll drop something in your inbox to say, hey, check out this interesting article or something. Cool, so we're not getting crazy with it. We just, you know, want to stay in touch. But yeah, definitely, I love to share everything that we're learning about key takeaways from projects. And, you know, I hope it helps people, you know, if, you know, like I said, if at the end of the day, I can share stuff with you that's going to, you know, save you a little bit of headache and make your the way you move through your product backlog a little easier, then, you know, I'm so happy to do that.
Cool. Well, we'll add those links to our show notes. Make sure to say hi to Christian and check out the work they're doing at Piola. Thanks again, Christian. I appreciate you jumping on SaaS District show today. It's been a great chatting with you.
It's been great. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you all for watching this episode and joining SaaS District today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for future episodes where we interview top leaders in the SaaS industry. If you're a SaaS company looking to grow and unlock the true value of your business, get in touch with us at Horizon Capital, and myself or one of our consultants will provide a free assessment to help you get there and hit your goals. If you have any feedback or suggestions for this podcast, please comment down below and help us improve our content for you all. Thanks again, and see you on the next one.